What's up, guys? We are back with the Respect My Region podcast, episode 7. More cannabis, music, marketing, all the in between. We've taken a couple weeks off. Your boy was down and out with COVID for a few weeks.
Dirty,
Got done dirty, slowly coming back.
dirty.
Um, how you doing today, Joey?
Man, it's another day. It's another dollar. It was 92 degrees today in LA.
92 in LA today.
Yeah, and it was hot. It was windy, but it was so nice. And I got some fire weed today.
You got some fire weed from all over, or you go to any particular store? Backpack boys,
Backpack
huh?
Boys.
Jumping on the hype train. How was the store?
The store was cool. They took over an old dispensary called Hollyweed, turned it into the Backpack Boys. The whole dispensary is painted red. There's graffiti. And I picked up the Pippin, man. Look at this.
The Scotty Piffin, huh?
Yeah, man. This is that real deal 29.17 total cannabinoids deal.
That looks pretty heat. I like the branding on that.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. So super cool. I'm not going to review it on this episode, so you guys are going to have to go subscribe to our YouTube. Shameless plug. But this is what I got today, so pretty excited to check that out. What are you on today for the weed?
Man, I'm just smoking some Tropicana garlic from Redbird.
Tropicana garlic, huh?
Formerly known as Virginia Co. up here in Washington. I don't know how much you can see it in the light, but man, it's some good. And you know me, I don't like garlic. I don't like garlic associated. Well, I like garlic, but I don't like GMO or garlic associated with my weed. It's just a turnoff for me for whatever reason. You got the knots. I got some of that too, but I don't want to dig it out. That's looking nice. Yeah, your boy finally got a rig, so now I'm finally on this dab life.
Yeah, I'm about to do a dab of this, and I got these buddies. This is some strawberry banana right here. Check this out.
Some straw nana. Oh, that looks nice.
Yeah.
Looks nice and terpy, man. So, just an update for everyone. We've been off for a few weeks. We got a lot of podcast episodes scheduled coming up. Couple life curveballs have taken us off the last few weeks, and you've probably noticed if you haven't now, we are switching from Sundays to Wednesdays. Wednesday. Yeah, so we're back on Wednesdays. We're gonna be doing this 8 p.m. No longer on Sundays. Joey will be doing some music on Sundays moving forward.
Yeah, the Sunday sesh, you know what I'm saying? Every Sunday at 11 a.m., you know what I'm saying?
Session. And, we'll keep this podcast on music, cannabis, marketing on Wednesdays, released on Spotify, Wednesday evenings, Thursday morning. Yeah, so we've been working a lot on our agency stuff. We obviously have two sides of our business. We have the publication and our social media profiles where we regularly push content out every day, which a lot of people know us from that, and merch and events and things of the sort. But we also do agency work on the back end for a lot of cannabis brands. We have been doing an ungodly amount of written content and SEO for dispensaries and deliveries across the country and Canada over the last 3 to 5 months. So we've been slacking a little bit on this type of content, getting content for other people done. Just got a couple clients that are real aggressive with the SEO, and we're scaling out for that. It's been a lot of work, and with that, we are slowly expanding our music and our cannabis content even away from as people that have been following us for a while have seen, from the Pacific Northwest down the West Coast, and now we are definitely slowly scaling out across the country, both music and cannabis content. And this year, for the fall, we might be doing something a little sneaky with the West Coast Weed Tour. It might be expanded. I don't necessarily want to lead too much onto that.
No, man, we leaking that shit. We hitting North America, baby. We going. So, I'm going. North America.
Yeah, so instead of the West Coast Weed Tour this year, Joey's pledging to travel to every state that will sell him cannabis. So Idaho, what do you got?
Hey, that is a goal, though. I would love to go to 50 states and smoke weed in 50 states. That shit would be crazy.
They'll sell you some potatoes, but that might be all you're getting out of there.
I will smoke weed out of a potato to shout out Idaho.
So for the music realm, I don't want to. We'll bring more to that probably next episode. We'll have more to talk about. That's definitely some big news. But we will be doing the North American Weed Tour, so the West Coast Weed Tour this year. More on that later. For one of our music topics that I want to talk about today, through the pandemic, artists have been stripped of monetization through shows and touring and getting on the streets, just even selling records how we used to back in the day. The virtual concerts and live streams were cool for a brief second. They've seemed to fall off. They don't hold the same value. It's incredibly hard to monetize. Even doing charity events, it's so much easier to raise money for charity funds at a live event than a virtual event. Even though the GoFundMe model has been popular, I'm not quite sure why, but there's quite a few reasons. But anyways, musicians are looking for ways to monetize their craft. NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, have been one of the hot things on the internet across all verticals and industries over the last 60 to 90 days is really when it popped on the scene.
Yeah, we'll call it like 4 months, 5 months.
Yeah, sure. And I think Top Shots, the NBA thing, is really what put it on the map for me personally. Now we're seeing a lot of people break into that. It is a trend. So my unsolicited advice to musicians out there is look at it. If it's for you, if you have the audience, it should be something cool worth exploring. But even if NFTs aren't for you, or you don't have the audience, you don't know how to leverage it, you don't even want to get into it, I think that it should be good inspiration to do something creative with both your marketing and your monetization of your brand. Nipsey's always the classic example of selling a mixtape just a couple years ago for $100 at a limited amount, and monetize his brand in the moment when everyone was consuming music for free. Even fast forward to a smaller scale, Alchemist and Freddie Gibbs, for their Grammy-nominated Alfredo album, came out with a super dope merch pack, themed around a Italian restaurant actually called Alfredo's, which is the name of the album, incorporated with some vinyl designs. Just a really cool exclusive merch pack that looked like it did some numbers, but it was just a creative way to market an album and also monetize the brand in a time where it's hard to do both of those things. So I would just encourage artists out there to look into NFTs, even if they're not for you, way over your head. Take that as motivation to look other ways to creatively market your music and monetize your craft.
Yeah, because the reality, bro, is that you create something digital, it has value, but it only has value if you create that value. If you're a brand, if you're artists, if your fans care about that. So make something digital, Google how to turn something into an NFT, or shoot us a message. I'll connect you. And then start putting it up there on the NFT marketplace apps that are out there. There's a couple of different apps. A good resource is to look at Gary V's NFT that he's launching. I forget which platform it's going through at the moment. Something like MetaDesk, or so, I forget, something Mask. I don't know. But there's a lot of people out there doing really cool things. Even Flosstradamus in the electronic music space. They just recently released an NFT that was kind of like a scavenger hunt that had you go through different steps and unlock certain things. And so it's a very interesting time right now where artists can be creating digital resources and digital assets, and then they can actually be sold, and then contractually they can make commissions off the resale. So it's an interesting time.
And then another one to check out for people out there is the Sing app. One of the founders is from Seattle. I believe it's Seattle and Los Angeles. Just came out. They released an exclusive sample pack with Seattle producer Jake One. But the Sing app is bringing the power of creating and selling NFTs to independent artists easy in an app. It's free to download. I haven't used it from an NFT perspective, so I can't give advice or experience on how that works. But if you're interested in that realm, it's a great resource backed by some really great, solid people from our community. But with tech and all of that talk being said, one of the conversations that we want to talk about on this podcast is powering marketing and sales with data. And for that, we are bringing in our good friend Barry Hurd, who is a data guru, internet mastermind, marketing assassin. I'm not quite sure what all taglines you hold, Barry. What does the LinkedIn profile say?
Super Barry.
I go with Dark Wizard and the Coffee Crew.
So Barry is somebody that we have worked with on the back end for a lot of different projects and on a couple different teams. A super wicked smart individual on all things internet marketing. Background is heavily focused in data, but data is what powers everything, and what some people are saying is worth more than gold. So I think you're a new school gold miner and I don't know, jeweler. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, no, I fall into that category of being the guy who just as a new market comes open, crack open the market, see what happens, and let people learn their lessons and move on. I usually end up being a very quick learner and bring people up to speed. I like the statement of using other people's money. Like, how many mistakes can I watch so I can develop the perfect game plan?
Yeah,
Love it. That's what you taught us to do.
Yeah, and I know from you working with you definitely extract data from a lot of different sources and then chart it and map it. Some ways I have a mini understanding of, some ways I'm completely lost on. But the power of taking different data sources and crossing them together to be able to draw conclusions and, like you said, build a roadmap of how to navigate through industries. You've worked in a lot of different industry verticals, and you feel like from a data perspective, looking at it kind of year over year, you can build a good roadmap no matter what industry it's in?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not just building a roadmap. It's just understanding every industry is a little bit more or less sophisticated than the next. And you've got multiple layers in each industry, and they're all at a different stage of sophistication. And it's about building little data bricks. It's like playing with your Legos, right? And sometimes the Legos have been stepped on and crushed, and sometimes they're just made out of Play-Doh or some random kid's food item. Sometimes I feel like when we're looking at the cannabis industry, that's sort of where some of these data pieces are. And then eventually we'll get to the premium galactic set of 10,000 Lego pieces that make the kids go wow.
Awesome. So what's a little bit of your history in working with data, some of the clients and companies you've worked with and the projects you've worked on?
I've pretty much been everywhere, done that. I grew up in the data space, was originally in recruiting. I spent a few years doing big sites like Monster, SEO plays, directory plays. Did a corporate stint at Verizon back at when it was GT and going into superpages.com. And then for the last 15 years, I've basically been doing this in the startup venture capital space, working with corporate ecosystems. So I'm up in Seattle. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 big tech players that have these monolithic ecosystems around it. I've done it on the East Coast. Did a couple sites for Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones, on the big end corporate names, and I've done everything to a little gold and commodities brokers that are running regional shops.
And so what has some of your experience been in the cannabis industry thus far?
Well, I mean, as soon as it was starting up here in Washington, probably a year prior to legalization, we started using a lot of the tools that we used in the other industries to start hoovering up information just to understand what was happening. And so as we watched state after state legalize, producers and retailers coming online, everybody did it a little different way. Now it's a couple of years into the process. There's a little bit of consistency, but as we see some of these new states coming on, it's very apparent that they're looking at what's come before them and they're saying, great, California did it this way. We are not going to do it the way California is doing it, right? So the politics side comes into it. People want to have their own fiefdoms. That's what we're seeing right now is some of these new states, they're coming up with unique and creative ways of doing their own thing. And that means that the data, the tech, the employees in those states, they're going to be culturally different. So that'll make a really interesting play. Is obviously you guys have seen there's a huge community aspect to this whole industry. And when California, Washington, Colorado bring one community and we start some of the East Coast communities come online, eventually those communities are going to come into alignment or conflict, that's going to be based off the dollars that these different states and counties are driving. Obviously, there's a couple big states coming online that, there's quite a bit of money that's going to pour into this ecosystem.
Right. With New York coming online, I know everybody's waiting for, a state like Texas. I mean, we're a little bit ways down the line, but that's going to be another huge domino in the scale of legal cannabis. And so what do you feel like? I know from our conversations, we've looked at how the industry's matured and how brands have matured with it. So from a data perspective, what do you think are some of the key points or the key areas where people are really winning and you feel like it's translating to success beyond just a PR metric?
The success is really, I think the brands that are doing it best right now are focusing, number one, on the team, the talent. Talented folks who are working in an organization, they can go through the wicked west and come up on top. And so right now, the game's changing on a pretty frequent basis, whether it's advertising on your digital sites or the vape industry getting a new regulation thrown on it. Mm-hmm. And that whether it's the bud tenders who are talented, or it's the dispensary owners, or the brands who are growing the product and packaging, the ones who can pivot the fastest are the ones that are biting little pieces of market share up. And for everyone that I see doing that, you look at any of these top lists coming out, and there's 3, 5, 20 top list contenders. There's a laundry list of dead bodies that are not on that list. People, dispensaries and brands that simply didn't make it, or they're in the startup space. They would call it a walking dead startup. They're successful enough and have enough money to keep on going, but they're not successful enough to scale to the next level.
And so that's probably something you're seeing a lot, with just the way it's rolled out, the way money has to fund these, the way big money's not in this. Cannabis itself has to look like a micro version of just the same startup culture you've been working in the last 15 years of all these ancillary and support businesses popping up, locally around like a Microsoft or an Amazon. Cannabis is doing the same thing in its own lane, right?
Yep. And it hasn't brought the sophistication across several different areas. So if you look at the technology vendors and things like that in the category, in a more advanced thing like fast food, there might be hundreds of technology vendors. Currently in the cannabis industry, there's 50 to 75. Right. So we are still off from this mass adoption of having a lot of good choices for fulfillment. So the 50 to 75 tech providers and data providers that are currently out there, 3 years from now, we're going to have 700 of them. And a lot of those are going to be downscaling from other industries. So we're going to see stuff like the accounting tools. We're going to see QuickBooks get into the category. We're going to see Salesforce get into the category. Most of these larger...
Yeah, with New York legalizing, QuickBooks and Salesforce will be on quick.
Yep.
That's the financial section of the world, so...
Well, in some of the directories, so I've done a lot of directory projects in my startup ecosystem life. I've done everything from food sites for millions of recipes to jobs. You look at what's happening right now, and a lot of dispensaries and retail points are relying on services like Leafly and Weed Maps at a time when Google is basically knocking those types of entities off the map. So a lot of the major directories, you look at services like Yelp, Google's eating their lunch, and Google simply become a monolithic entity that's absorbing all of these niche industry players. And that's true for Yelp at retail. It's true across the travel, tourism category, hotels, car rentals, anything that there's a directory version of. Google has successfully hoovered that in. You see that a lot just by looking at search and going on for a dispensary search term and pulling up your favorite spot, and pretty soon you're getting 10 of your favorite photos, all the reviews, the 15 different products, and you haven't even left the first page of Google.
Right.
Right.
And so with that being said, I mean, how important do you feel like it is? Because it's something Joey and I preach all the time. If you're going to advertise on Weed Maps, Leafly, and get great ROI, that's great, but you need to be investing in assets you control, which you can plant flags on Google with, whether it's social media profiles, especially your website. But I mean, how important do you think that is, A, in the short term, and then B, in the long term for this industry?
I think it's the most important part is understanding where the trend is on those different things. So whether it's being on top of Google, it's understanding what you're building. And one of the reasons I always say Legos is a great example is because, if somebody comes along and kicks over your castle, you still have all these pieces. And if you're a smart person, you know what pieces are important to you. Right. And as soon as you want to build something else out of this pile of Legos, if you've got a plan, if you know where you have to be tomorrow, if you know what kid wants to play with you, right, you can immediately take the assets that you have and you can reconstruct and move forward. The current gap that's happening in the industry is somebody's developing a website or they're getting on one of these directory services and they're doing a one-shot wonder, right? Like, hey, I'm making all this money, and you saw this a lot, especially in like Washington State when all the dispensaries got their licenses. The first 2 years, the competition wasn't properly there, so that everybody was making money hand over fist, even though they were doing most of the things wrong. And as that has matured, they have now doubled down and said, I make money because we do this one thing really well, or we have a YouTube video and we know that process and we're going to get millions of views. Eventually that is going to change, and your sacred cow that makes all your money is going to vaporize. So startup 101 as you're scaling a company is to develop as many prongs to that. And we've had that conversation a lot with the RMR team. Social media, is there SEO? Is it live events? Like, the answer is all of the above, right? And knowing that when your live events get nailed by the pandemic, that you can immediately change gears, right? You've got a transmission, and you immediately double down on something that's working.
Right.
Not going through a 6 to 12 month learning curve while everybody else is making money.
Right. No, and that's so important. I was literally on the phone earlier with a couple people behind one of the two different calls with people behind large ad platforms in cannabis, and something they consistently said was the people that came and just wanted to test something, spend a little bit of money into a test campaign, were significantly the results sucked compared to the people that were like, I want to work for 60 to 90 days, work hand in hand to develop a campaign that's actually working. And, I know me and you have spoke about that previously, whether you're converting real estate leads or doing anything, you need to run it. And Joey knows this from a lot of the campaigns he's been behind for us, is seeing stuff out for 60 to 90 days, because even the same campaign might not work in 30 days for whatever, maybe it's the media cycle, maybe it's whatever happened in the world, but that same campaign can start working. But more importantly, you need a data set or a little bit of time to know what's working, what's not, and why.
Yep. Well, it's about identifying those Lego pieces, really, like what's working and preparing for the future for when it's not working, right? And also developing the risk tolerance that when you see something's working, to whip out a checkbook and say, I'm going to 2-fold it, 5-fold it, 10-fold it, right? I'm going to write a big check, because for 30 to 90 days, that might be the moneymaker. It might also shut off, right? So option A, get ready to write a big check. Option B, get ready to pull it down to zero and do something else.
Right.
Gotta be flexible.
Yep.
Where do you feel the market is at percentage wise in terms of maturity in on the West Coast, the most mature markets in cannabis? What percentage would you give them in terms of market maturity right now?
So I actually use a system. It's a very open one called the technology readiness level. It's a system that NASA uses, a bunch of startups in the European nations use. It's a 1 to 9 scale. Every industry, as they're developing these new things, has a 1 to 9. One's like you have an idea on a napkin, and the 9 is it's battle proven, and we want to make 100,000 of them and use them on a daily basis. Yeah. Right now, if you look at the most sophisticated ones in Colorado and California, they're like maybe threes. Right.
Okay.
Washington's a 2 or a 3. So when you're talking on a 9 scale, that validation, we'll probably see a California and Colorado move into the 4 and 5 because the amount of money and sort of expertise that's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months is going to accelerate things. But the newer states that are opening up are effectively borrowing or stealing the plans from the guys who came before them. Right. So you can pretty much look at whether it's Michigan opening up, New York, they stole most of the components of their plan from somebody else. Sure. So they don't start at a 0 or a 1. They're going to start at a 2 or 3 right sort of score and move up from there.
What would you say are the primary factors that provide, that kind of dictate those lower scores?
The biggest ones are team capabilities. So as the industry matures and the salaries sort of stabilize, the true performers, the guys that are worth 10 or 100 people, they're going to have their salaries and their income levels capped off, and you're not going to see this migration. If you look at it, something like LinkedIn, the amount of senior level talent that is in a cannabis role for 6 to 15 months is ridiculous. Right? Like, I did my 12 months here, boom, I'm off to the next company. You see that in some startup industries, but in cannabis, it's gotten to a catastrophic level, actually. That, hey, I see Mitch is a great guy. He's doing some good ideas. I'm just going to pick up the phone and offer him 50% more, double his income, right? Most common people will be like, hey, I'm going to take the offer, right? So one of the things that is not locking these people in, for the most part, is unlike many of the other startup industries that lock those employees in with all sorts of stock options and vesting scenarios, most cannabis operations aren't willing to do that. They haven't structured the ownership and the equity to the business. In fact, there's 2 or 3 license holders and they're like, no, you can't touch this, right? Like, we want to take all the profit out of it. We want to make the $1 million business. And as a bud tender, we want to offer you $18 an hour.
And so from an investment side, is it almost like, the ownership, a lot of the ownership and the funding right now is smaller in the scale of the wide scale of funding across any industry. And so there might be just a little bit more, is it maybe more greed just to that nature, that level of investor that puts up probably a majority of their life savings or work. And so they really need that to work out and extract the profits, as opposed to when we see more traditional investors where this is just one of 100 things in a fund. So if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's less kind of, survival mode.
Yeah, I mean, the market sophistication is actually sort of in parallel with the investor sophistication. So you sort of said it in the fact that most investors currently in the category don't have a portfolio of cannabis companies. They've backed 1 or 2 entities, and that's their sacred cow. So they really put all their eggs in one basket. Right. And there's obviously big returns at that stage. If it happens to be the unicorn and it gets to the end of the game and it becomes public, or it hits 500 or 1,000 employees, like that investor gets a big reward. But in the startup ecosystem, we're looking at 17 to 19 out of 20 companies failing. Mm-hmm. And any good business analyst is going to tell you that cannabis is not going to be an outlier to a high percentage of failures.
Yeah, so, that makes sense. It's the same old risk as always.
Yeah, it's actually going to be
with more restrictions.
More restrictions, smaller market, less voice. There isn't a monolithic lobbying voice for cannabis at the federal level. I mean, we like as a community to see it, and we lock hands a lot of times in the industry. But if you look at something like food workers or the steel workers of America, like cannabis is nowhere near
Yeah,
that
there's
type.
a lobbying force like that. We
Right?
need
Like
the we need the NRA and their
well,
money.
we even went to it as there was a thread a couple days ago that we had some commentary about Uber getting into the game, and Uber's been fighting the taxi unions, like all the transportation, the civil engineers, like literally millions of license holders who have fought them. And some of those guys who are fighting them are out of New York. So, a medallion in New York is $1 million item. A lot of us think, oh, it's just a taxi cab. It's like, no, that little medallion that goes on a taxi cab, that's a $700,000 to $1 million item for that taxi cab. And you have a taxi cab owners who have hundreds or thousands of these things, right? And they have spent a significant amount of their money to put up many barricades and blocks so that they can continue to make money. And that's where cannabis is going to have some interesting impacts. So you watch New York open up, and you look at all the liquor shops, the smoke shops, the lounges, right? You are dealing with some pretty major markets that those individuals and those industries have protected themselves. One of the ways they did that is through regulation and the lobbyist movements.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I can definitely see that happening. The lobbying for cannabis at a much higher level is going to help roll out that roadmap and mature the industry. And do you think, like in your experience with working, I know you've worked with a couple markets that, emerging or taboo or whatever we want to call it. Do you feel like when things start happening for those industries, it's pretty quick, or you feel like it is a slow process all the way through?
No, it's usually pretty quick. Usually what happens is somebody's positioned themselves that whatever change is holding everybody else up, they're either in the know or they're the ones driving that change. So, whether you look at some of the larger players in this industry that are putting hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars into setting up the dominoes, right? They're playing a big game in the monopoly, hoping that somebody locks up the right 3 or 4 squares on the board. It's a risky move because other players are trying to do the same thing on the monopoly board. They're trying to stack the deck in their favor, and whoever gets there first at some of these major markets is really has an unfair advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that somewhat with the new administration and some of the legalization that's happening just this year. That there are some players in the category that are well positioned with the relationships they have.
Right.
And you can see some of these policies going through at the state level, and even guys like us, you read the basic document and you're like, wow, that one bullet point that eradicates like 50% of the competition right there.
Mm-hmm.
One simple line.
That's crazy. That's so true, though, too. We've seen that happen with multiple categories and types of products just being removed from the offerings in specific states.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, legislation is something, and that's something I personally think as we move forward towards federal legalization, I feel like the majority of people kind of have these glossy, glasses when they're looking at it, and they're just thinking like, oh, once federal legalization's here, like it'll be all open. We'll be able to advertise on Facebook and Google. We'll be treated as a real business. And I think, I personally think as federal legalization comes, and you just have more, it's just going to be more regulation. Maybe certain tools and avenues will open up, but I definitely feel like there's just going to be more regulation. The government's going to have a more defined way of extracting dollars at a high, consistent level, and it's not going to be the rainbow fields that a lot of people feel it's going to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially on the advertising side, I've had a lot of conversations with people who are like, oh, as soon as it's legal, Facebook's going to take our money. It's like, I can point to a laundry list on the Facebook policy site that there are 50 plus categories that Facebook knows those categories are fully legal. They've been legal for years, sometimes decades. Facebook says we don't want your money. Right. So there are not only political but personal decisions at Facebook or Google or many of these other companies that they don't have to take your money. They're private companies. More importantly than being just a private decision, it's usually a money-driven one, right? So Obviously, if you have a very kumbaya community, you're not going to get into a Mortal Kombat offering. You're not going to bring something that's toxic to your company, and you're not going to promote that.
Right.
You can see that at LinkedIn. LinkedIn won't let you bring in a competitive product. If Facebook looks at this community and says, this is the next step of people enjoying themselves at sporting events, music festivals, things like that, they're going to put inhibitors on it because that jeopardizes their current revenue stream.
Right.
Right. I mean, you saw that actually just with Facebook with the pandemic when they made it against their policy to let musicians do live events on Facebook. Right. They didn't want musicians to monetize that. Facebook wants to monetize that.
Right. 100. Yeah. They want to be the outlet, the hub, and then you can start selling merch, but you give up a percentage there. The coming in with that 360 deal.
Yep.
Yeah, it is so true. So, kind of back to the topic of data, there are a couple players in this space. I know through our, some of our private conversations, both you and I, and with these other data companies, a lot of the industry isn't leveraging data quite yet. So before I get into kind of ways that they can do that and better that, what are some of the ways that you've seen from an outside perspective of people leveraging data in a good way, or something that at least give you a golf clap from you? I know you're probably not going to be screaming with applause from the stands, but what are some of the areas that you see data being leveraged correctly in this space?
I think for more of the boutique players, the ones that haven't scaled up, the ones that are doing it successful are the ones that are really getting behind an audience or a community persona, right? They've stepped away from what you see at so many dispensaries of we sell weed and we'll sell weed to anybody. And they've locked down and said, no, we're going to sell it to this type of school mom, or we're going to sell it to this type of skateboarder, right? And they understand that they're a community driven process, and they've really locked down onto that. And that especially locks down for our RMR that's what it's about.
Right.
If you have your community secure and you understand it, you sort of know where the content's going, and you know what they want, right? When something bad happens, you know where the community is going to go. Right? We could probably send out a poll to most of the dispensaries out there saying, would you like to buy more product or not? And they actually don't know why their customer is doing what they're doing. They just looked at the pandemic and said, wow, people are buying a lot of this. But did they actually understand that their customers are sad, they're depressed, they're anxious, that they're looking for a release? Were they ready to communicate that when it happened? Right. And I live not too far north of Seattle, and you look at the major employers, and there's a couple major employers, obviously, that some of the dispensaries locally probably have a 20 to 40% customer base off one or two employers. Same's true of some school dispensaries. They're not allowed on university, but they know exactly 25, 30% of their audience is from campus.
Yep.
Right.
Tourism.
If you know you're next to an airport, you know exactly who you're servicing. You're not servicing everybody. You're servicing a very select community that you've really chosen to understand. So if on the data side, that's where I'd say that's the win, is people who are using tools to understand that category that they know they serve, and that is going to be with them for the long run.
Right. And that's the brand positioning, understanding your brand, understanding your voice, understanding who you're speaking to, where they're at, all dictates, your purchasing, your sales, your marketing outreach. And absolutely right. That's just a key example of data aligning with everything else. So what are some of the areas that you see could be improved upon looking at data? I'm sure what you just talked about can be improved on greatly by a lot of people, but what are some areas that kind of blatantly stand out to you where you just look and you're like, man, people are just not looking at the data or the trends?
Oh, well, I just pulled a list of a couple thousand dispensary sites across the U.S. and pulled all their analytics down for what they're doing online, what type of sites they're running in SEO. I was pretty saddened over the fact that roughly a quarter of the licenses out there that have a either a Weed Maps, a Yelp, or a Leafly listing. They don't even have websites. I mean, when I look at a dispensary, if I look at any business and your website or social presence is a Google Places account where 3 or 4 photos of your little shanty with a welcome sign is posted, that's not yours. Right? Like, that's whatever Google wants to do with it. And that's where the Leafly's, Weed Maps, and Yelp, they're making so much money off this industry because that laggard category of the 20 or 30% that don't bother doing this stuff, the basics. Yelp's taking all that traffic and selling it to somebody else. Leafly's taking all that traffic and selling it to somebody else. Yeah. So it's good for a more established company that is on one of these platforms properly. But for that little guy who's a 3 to 20 person employer who doesn't think it's worth it, you just lost your business and you don't know it.
Yeah, and it's so
every day.
It's powerful, and that's Joey and I know yourself. We've invested in websites for businesses that have never even launched. And we see businesses that have been around for a year making revenue, and will come up with, I don't want to invest in a website, and it's just like, in this day and age, man, it might not be step 1, but that's in the first 3 steps. Is you need to get your website up.
It needs to be up, but it covers 2 or 3 different topics. It's not just for the customers, it's for the employees, it's for the community, right? Like, if a prospective employee can't find you, thousands of bud tenders want to apply at your place, but they can't even get your contact information. Like, right. You are doing yourself a huge disservice. In fact, like I see multiple dispensaries on various analytic dashboards that I touch that they're getting hundreds of applications on a monthly basis for various roles. Some of them aren't even checking those resumes, right? Like they don't even bother responding. That's scary when an organization gets 100 applications a day and they don't even have an HR person to respond. Right. To say, hey, Mitch, like, we don't have a spot for you today, but we'd love to keep you on the list and keep you in mind. Or, what are you really looking for? Right. To have that 5-minute conversation, because they're too worried that, hey, Thursday at 5 o'clock, we're going to have too many customers at the counter. We need everybody on hand to fulfill orders. Those employees and prospective team members are far more valuable than 1 or 2 customers. Not saying that customers aren't worth their weight in gold.
Sure.
But every employee is going to touch 1,000 customers. Right. And you see that. I know Joey's brought it up before. You look at the liquor and nightclub industry, top bartenders up. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go down the street. I'm going to take my 500 patrons with me. How many times have we seen that in the cannabis ecosystem?
Oh yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah, I could, just off the social data that's out there with retail staff, tell you exactly who needs to have their salaries tripled, because they're going to bring 1,000 customers with them.
That's crazy. That's crazy to think about.
Yeah, well, that's the scary part, where when the new money comes into this ecosystem, there's a lot of conversations saying, oh, it takes a lot of experience. But if you have a more or less an unlimited bank account and you're just willing to double, triple, quadruple paychecks and hire 100 people, you're going to get the 100 best people in cannabis in California. Right. And so, yeah, you might have a harsh bottom line the first year, but you're going to have the stellar A team and all of their relationships for the cost of $50 million. And it sounds like a big number, but that's in the industrial startup category. Doing an aqua hire where you just buy companies up or buy employees up is a no-brainer.
Right. It's a growth hack.
I don't think most of the people watching this even understand what you're saying.
Well, they'll understand what I say when they almost no employees are getting non-competes. So that's one data point. I look at all of the postings on various different job platforms. There's very little in the education space that locks those people down. There's very little stock incentives that locks those people down. There's not a non-compete or an NDA process for most dispensaries. In fact, I can't honestly think of a dispensary where I've seen a retail person get a non-disclosure contract when they get their employment.
That's people
I
are
can't.
people are willing to share that information to them, and that's the thing. It's a small industry, and people aren't taking those precautions.
Well, they're not taking the precaution, but it gets scarier because when I put on the bad guy hat and say, what about the data? The dark side of the equation is the data breach. Right, so you have all these retail staff and members who have access to your various inventory, customer controls, right? So you think of them as a bud tender who makes $20 an hour. They think of it as, oh, look, I've got access to the cash register and the 20,000 accounts that are here. Right? Insert thumb drive, download spreadsheet. Hey, boss, I'm quitting. Mm-hmm. Right? That most of the inventory customer control systems that are currently in market don't have those precautions to protect the customer data.
Right.
So we haven't seen too many of them. Actually, unfortunately, in Washington, we did see a couple data breaches in the cannabis space.
Yeah.
But we're going to see a lot more at the dispensary level and some of the grow producer level here in the next year and a half.
Right. Yeah.
They're now good targets for bad people.
Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah. I don't think a lot of people have, thought about that. And it's just, I think it's the nature of some of these smaller businesses just not applying, corporate mythology or to their process.
You got to protect yourself.
And so, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know you've done this in various verticals, but when looking at the data for like influencer marketing campaigns, and a lot of which is hot in cannabis, especially in California, and a lot of people just simply hire people that have following, based on follower count. Some people look into their, their engagement or their targeted engagement of where their followers are at. But what are some of the ways that you look at from the back end of setting up an influencer campaign to make sure it's set up for success?
The largest one for success is the length of the campaign. So if the shorter the campaign that's being enacted, the worst case scenario sort of escalates at that point, because if somebody is doing something short term, whether it's to drive clicks to a website or customers on a special event day, that's a one-off experience for them. And they're usually, why I say that's a worst case scenario is because they're doing it for the money and only the money, right? They're not doing it for the relationship, but they're also doing it from a perspective that because it's a one-off or a short-term project, they're looking to take those learnings and do it with somebody else as well. Mm-hmm. Right? So if they get really, really good at this, they're going to do it for your company, dispensary A, and then B and C and D and all the competitors down the street, right? Whether it's a $5,000 influencer campaign or not. If you really want to build an influencer strategy for success, you have to have a circle of trust. You actually have to figure out who you're going to get in a relationship with for quite a bit of time, right? 6, 12, 18 months, so that they understand there's going to be some learning lessons. And when they learn those lessons, they're going to take that education and use it on your behalf.
Interesting.
And that's good to look at because, we all know not every advertising campaign goes the way you intend. And sometimes, your level of trust in it might be low from the start, but even stuff that you think, oh, this is going to be a home run, it can sometimes clearly be a dud for a million variables inside and outside of our control. But I think that's absolutely a great point, because if I pay Joey for an influencer campaign and it sucks, I might, a traditional mindset is, oh, Joey is terrible, he's not worth the value. And it could just be situational. It could be maybe the input. It could, it could be a wide variety of things. So that's absolutely, I think, a gem of what you just said, of the power of working long term to see what works and double, and to speak on what you said earlier, double down on things that do work, rather than just flash in the pan things, because it's definitely it's hard to gauge success on one thing.
Well, and it's not just hard to gauge success. There's a lot of people are out there that are unfortunately very good at being bad, and they if you put a metric or a qualifier that they have to hit, they figured out a way to cheat the system to make that one metric happen. And they take their $10,000 or whatever you paid them, and they disappear. They go to the bank and say, "Have a nice day." That is pretty much every industry, whether it's people buying links and promotion in for SEO, or influencers, making a mention on Instagram for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can see some of that on the Instagram channels. I'm sure if you just take a look at the top 100 sort of celebrities in the space, the number of things they're sort of rotating through on a weekly or a monthly basis, the consistency tells you pretty quick of what their strategy is. I'm going to operate this meat grinder and take a lot of money, and next month I don't have to worry about your brand because there's going to be 3 more to take your place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Pump it, dump it.
Yeah, we see that a lot, and something we see from the agency perspective is pairing an influencer with a brand, and then them working together with us out of the equation. That happens almost every single time, whether it's music or cannabis. It's usually the brand that we work with that promises to not overstep, but ultimately it's on us to lock in the better paperwork and better situations that are long term. Preach to these people the value of working long term, so we can also add our value to that equation long term. And speaking of Instagram, what are some of the drivers in looking at data? Like, how important do you think it is being active on Instagram in this industry in relation to the actual size and scale of your brand sales? Do you feel like they correlate? Do you feel like there's a disconnect? Do you feel like at some points it's either or?
A lot of cases it's an either or. Specifically in this category, the main problem is that most of the larger influencer campaigns that I see, when you look at the sophistication of what's happening on the website, mobile, what they're doing at the store level in the real world, they're not at the level of actually tracking how that functions for them.
Thanks.
Right. So sure, they got a spike of 500 people liking their Facebook and Instagram posts, but they don't actually know what to do with that. Right. So they do point at it next, on the weekend and say, well, look, we got 1,000 people to like our Instagram account. We got more followers, but they actually haven't done the math or installed the analytics systems properly to know it's not just 1,000, it's not a fictional number on Instagram that's going up. It's actually a cash register, a new employee hire. Something is actually driving revenue for the business.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's looking at it different. So, we're getting close to that hour that we usually try to hold it to on the show. So I don't want to leave it super open-ended, but is there anything else that you feel like people should know out there when it comes to data, the cannabis space, some ways that you could potentially help their business, plug yourself, anything like that?
Oh, I mean, there's so many ways to help the business. That'd be a long conversation. The the core ones are, take the time to educate yourself on these categories. Being in cannabis doesn't mean you're in cannabis. Being in business means you're in cannabis. You can say you're in the cannabis industry all day long, but if you don't back it up with common business acumen, there are many other sophisticated industries that are far ahead of where cannabis is. Take the time to read some of their case studies, visit sites like Google that has a data studio and a whole list of learning materials.
Mm-hmm.
And read it from a different lens. Like, take it with a grain of salt, but understand trillions of dollars have been spent designing this stuff. Cannabis really doesn't have anything new to the process, right? People want a good time. They want a good product. They want to feel good, have a good community, frictionless experience at the counter, right? All the things that pretty much every other category of business has said for the past 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Learn from those lessons, and then really look at what's being offered out in the marketplace of cannabis and say, is this the same thing? Right. The conclusion there for me is that most of what's being offered in the cannabis ecosystem, you would rate poorly in the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did have a choice, you would use QuickBooks or Google or whatever the top tier Salesforce provider is. And if you don't know what you're buying, you're going to spend a lot of money getting tools and services. And at the end of the day, think, wow, the guy who sold me a cannabis tool or told me I'd get, the best employees on the face of the planet for the business. You were looking at it from an unrealistic, inexperienced perspective.
Mm. Mm.
It's tough.
Yeah, it's really tough. Ask questions, get a mentor group. That's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, linking up with the businesses and the companies who have done it already in a fashion or have built brands already that that you kind of have respect for, and how they how their processes as well. Kind of learning about how they do it. Massively important. That's what we've done. We've been able to ask and work with so many different brands and learn from you as well, and the experience from the different industries has really been able to help different people fast track or even fast track us to helping other people.
Yep. Well, and just look at all the industry and figure out the ones that are on the top of the list because they're spending a lot of money on marketing and brand messaging, when in fact their business is non-functional. We probably see all those horror stories on a daily basis. Somebody doing bankrupt or getting charged with embezzlement in this industry. We don't need that type of stuff. But the being able to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on marketing saying you're amazing, unfortunately, the category is still listening to those messages saying, wow, Bob says he's good. Bob's all over the NASDAQ sign. Bob must be good.
Nobody knows these companies are doing poorly or that their product's not good. They just see the press and the ads and the marketing and think it's just all fun and games until they get there, and then it's not good.
Well, even the one I would give you as the best example to tie it up is you see a lot of these acquisitions going on, and everybody tries to say, wow, this is an amazing thing. This dispensary, this grower got bought by some larger entity. In the startup space, they do that all the time, but it's usually for less than what the company is worth, because the conversation goes, hey, I see you've got 50 employees and you don't have the revenue, right? Your business is underwater. I will hire everybody on your team, give them the same salaries. I'm just acquiring all of your employees. But the next day there's a press release about it saying how amazing it is. Right? And the acid test of that is you look at the founders and the core executive team. And if those people are getting acquired in the process and don't quit their jobs in 6 to 12 months, it probably wasn't that good a deal.
Interesting.
Somebody buys my company for $25 million. I'm going to pocket a whole bunch of that money and sit on the beaches and enjoy my Mai Tais.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing that a lot in the public companies and the companies that have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend right now. Is there's a lot of semi-questionable acquisitions taking place.
So
but they look really good.
Might be a little more paper than substance to some of these stories.
It's a good story though.
That's awesome. So before we get you out of here, where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can visit our data site for cannabis, which is 421data.com. And they can find me through RMR and conversations whereabouts online.
Yeah, hit us up if y'all have any questions regarding data for Barry, anything regarding SEO, websites, hiring, projections, revenues, scaling your business, trying to get to the moon, anything about gravitational forces and designing mass destruction, also experience in dark wizardry. Did I say that? Is that all correct? Am I right with all that?
Yes, I've touched all those things, but I only do those on the weekend.
All right, Barry. Well, thank you for joining us today, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you. It was a great
Thank you, guys.
All right, so that was our guest, Barry Hurd. Excellent, smart individual. We asked him, requested that he dumbed it down for us so that Joey and I could understand what he's saying. But
that was the glossy-eyed look I had the whole podcast. I'm just like, yep, getting game. Yep.
He said a lot of important things in there. You know, one of them I think resonates and echoes what we say a lot on here and just in our normal conversations. You know, he mentioned that a lot of dispensaries are leaning strictly on Google listings or Weed Maps or Yelp. And he said, you do not own those. That is space that you lease. And it's actually space that you invest your time and money because somebody down your line is either sacrificing money or you're paying money to run it, to build up a traffic platform that is literally sold to your competitor without your control. It is important to invest in your own assets, and social media profiles are not assets because those can also be stripped at you at the drop of a dime. Many of us in cannabis know that.
You got to think, right? He said 25% or so of the people of the companies, the dispensaries that he ran, you know, I think 1,000 or 2,000 report list, right? And we've been a part of, we've seen those lists. We've seen the thousands of dispensaries, right? So it's like, the reality is that if a quarter of those don't even have websites, a quarter of those are probably overspending and just pouring money into it because that's how their business survives, right? And then you've got another quarter that are probably just chilling and spending bare minimum just because they don't know what else to do and they're not financially can't or they financially just are afraid and can't, and won't, right? So, you know, that's 4 quarters right there. So, you know, Weed Maps and Leafly, they can really flick a switch and kind of change the direction and stream traffic and sales one way or the other. And, you know, Google kind of has the ability to do that. They're obviously not dedicating any attention to cannabis stuff whatsoever. So, or YouTube really as well. So it's like, you know, the reality comes down that you should be investing, you know, into content on your own platform, on your own publication. Again, if you're watching this podcast, the only reason why you got here is because we've built a brand based on content around specific terms, specific things, in specific places with a purpose and a goal to acquire people's attention on those topics, about those people, about those products, about those things and places, hikes, dispensaries, restaurants, whatever it is. So, you know, I think the thing to take away from Barry and all this is to, you know, continue investing time and energy into building your own assets, content piece by content piece, making sure that it ranks digitally in SEO, that you're then distributing it through your socials and your newsletters and any of the avenues that you have that you can make money or that you can drive promotional traffic towards, right? So, Barry really dumbed it down for all of us. I'm sure he could have gone on and on, but you know, the reality is get your website, build it, keep building it, stop spending so much money on these other platforms, spend more money on yourself and educating the people and that spend the most money with you. There's one of my favorite reports that I read about data. It comes from the Headset Group. It really dives in and talks about, you know, the heroes and the people that make up the majority of money on your business. They spend money consistently. It's a larger size basket, and they're willing to support on social media and engage at higher levels and continue. So those kinds of people also refer business, right? And so if you're a small business in a smaller community, less than 100,000 people in your city, or even if you've got 1 million plus people in your city, you have the ability to identify some key things about groups of people. Go out of your way to find out who's shopping at your store, what they buy, what they like, what do they like about your store, and continue to replicate that. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. You'll increase your sales. More people will hear about you. The reviews will go through the roof. And then from there, you can just kind of start to add on a little additional experiences. You know, talking to people, you know, using their first name, making sure that every single person gets offered standard greetings and standard goodbyes. You know, offering a truly elevated experience includes more than just offering things for sale at different pricings and shit like that, right? So there's really a lot that goes into providing the best customer experience for your heroes, for your money makers, for your tourists, for the people that are stopping by, for the people that are just shopping based on the local deal of the week, right? So there's so many different reasons why people shop. You really got to dive into that information.
100%. And then I want to say, Micah, I saw you drop a question on there. We're going to get to that in 1 second. I just want to finish up this recap of Barry. Something he said to me that stood out incredibly was, the view of employees. This is a high turnover industry. Most sales positions, whether you're working at the mall or just sales of anything in general, is high turnover. It's just the nature of sales. But something that he mentioned that stood out to me was every employee is going to touch 1,000 customers. And sometimes, and he said the mindset of ensuring that all employees are on the sales floor so you don't miss a customer. You'd rather, instead of having a full-time marketing person, you have a bud tender that does marketing, yet you're always pulling them over for marketing to do bud tending. And what he was saying is, maybe if you just let that person do whatever, whether it's HR, marketing, whatever, you could let that person, maybe you lose a couple customers a week, but what that person can impact on your business will greatly outweigh continually pulling people away to fight these fires. That was just something that was super impactful. One employee touches 1,000 customers.
Yeah, you spent the right HR person, can get a really quality one, $3,000 to $4,000, a month over the course of a year, $36,000 to $48,000. They hire a bud tender. That bud tender can come in and do $3,000 to $4,000 a day. At the right dispensary with the right training, the right education, the right investment into their knowledge and into their customer service base. Hello, Mitch. Nice to meet you. What brings you in today? We're offering a special if you're interested. Otherwise, let's talk about some weed today. Just some real friendly, authentic, look them in the eye and respectful stuff to everyone. Hiring a diverse staff. So that way you can offer and potentially switch in and out of people. Why? Talking to an older person or a younger person or language barriers, all these things are always going to be involved in everyday society, and being able to provide an experience for any type of person that you can visit, who visits your retailer, is going to be important. In LA, we've got a lot of Spanish speaking people, correct? How many bud tenders are people hiring that can speak Spanish, right? Huge thing. I would assume that the Asian American community is probably not getting service to the same capacity as most general Caucasian white people communities. So it's one of these things where, as the community and the industry continues to grow, hopefully they can start to invest more into training, into more diversity, more inclusion, and we'll start to see a higher level of service, a higher level of education. I think all those things will lead to more revenues and an overall expansion of the community. One thing that people always forget about is, as small an infancy as this industry is, there's still tens of millions of consumers buying all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And that's still so small compared to how many people shop at grocery stores every day, how many people get gasoline every day, right? How many people buy cigarettes every single day, right? Worldwide, things like that, water bottles worldwide, right? So as cannabis truly opens up, as the door and the light truly does shine on this whole thing existing in every state, in hundreds of countries worldwide, I think we'll start to see a meteoric shift in people understanding. I think we'll start to see more Suits and Chads and Brads and Karens get in the space, good ones and bad ones. I think overall we'll start to just see a saturated market where people are going to get away from doing these other industry jobs that they don't like and start to try to get into cannabis and CBD. Mm-hmm. I welcome it. I come from technology. I come from reffing basketball, right? Remember those days, Mitch? Mm-hmm. And you and I are both college graduates. So it's not like you and I are straight up California Humboldt trappers. That's not our gist, right? So although we've done some of these things and we've been a part of some of those activities throughout our life, we're certainly not a 20-year, 30-year cannabis OG veteran to that capacity, right? So it'll be interesting to see all these OGs and these corporate marketers and these influencers from other spaces start to all work together and become cohesive, right? Celebrities and athletes. We saw a major shift in sports over the last 2 years, becoming much more cannabis friendly. We've seen so many states legalize in terms of medical and recreational. Denver just legalized social equity, put through a social equity program, I believe, and approved delivery on 419. And so major things are shifting. Major things are happening, and data is ultimately going to tell the story, and it's going to identify lots of trends for people to, if they use the data and they can look at the metrics and they can understand things at a higher level, then they'll be able to hire better people, make more money, and better serve their customers.
100%, 100%. We have a question that was pertaining to the websites, but from an artist perspective. Micah, you chime in the comments if you're still with us, man. If not, you can get this on the replay. But he asked, should artists have websites?
Absolutely, right? So
yeah.
the reality is that if you only have Spotify, if you only have Instagram, if you only have SoundCloud, Apple Music, Tidal, all of those things, then technically you're only available to that consumer base. And so it forces your customer to download Apple, to pay a subscription just to have access to your music. When in reality, excuse me, that you want to send someone to the location where all your music can be located. And I think it goes without saying that if you have, it doesn't necessarily have to be a link tree, but if you have a location that can have all of your links to all of the locations where your music is available and sold and streamed, then you are more likely to get a consumer to utilize a platform that they are already friendly and signed up to. You and I pay for Spotify. The roommate is only an Apple Music consumer. So we don't consume the same music every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have access to some of the same music if those artists choose to have that content on all of the major streaming platforms. But the reality is these days we're starting to see people with certain content or what's called exclusive content on just one platform. We're starting to see just video shows or behind the scene TVs on things like OnlyFans and Patreon, right? We're starting to see custom things on Clubhouse that are branded in a podcast method. We're starting to see, obviously media and websites went from magazines at first and newspapers at first to now they're doing blogs and digital, right? That's been a major shift in the last 30 years. So, all these different avenues are important. A website is going to rank on Google. Google's the biggest search engine in the world. I think it's the most important place to have all of your stuff first. All your articles, all your press, all your music should be posted first on your website, and then your press releases should be distributed to the other areas.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I think a website is a must-have for any brand, anyone that wants to be discovered on the internet.
I will be working on a website here soon, and JPing's choice or JPing's something will be coming to life because, I don't want to be sending all my traffic from my nickname just to Instagram all the time.
Right. You want to own that because like we said in cannabis, and it's very prevalent that your social media accounts can get shut down. Similar thing, like Boosie's been shut down on Instagram, right? And for a lot of people, in this era, they solely survive off of their Instagram. And so having a website is somewhere where you can host, like Joey said, links to every single place your music's at, all your social media profiles. And have a store. So it's just like you don't want to, if someone says, where's your music or send a link, the last fucking thing you want to say is Google me, and then the next worst thing you could do is like, well, if you're on Spotify here, if you're on YouTube here, then you're sending people 6 links, and now you're just giving them more reason to be like, nah, I'm not interested. If you just have one place to go, or if I see your name and I think of it and Google it later, you'd rather that person land on your website, because then the next action they take is going to be very impactful. If I've Googled you, if I've clicked on a link to your website, and now I'm engaging with something on your website, I'm going to be there's a high chance that I'm committed into that next action. If you click on a link, it's a lot of people click off websites within the first 5 seconds. But if
the value of having a website significantly outweighs only having Instagram, it significantly outweighs only having Spotify. Like, let's just cut the fat. If you're a music artist and you're only on one music streaming place, you're freaking tripping. You're crazy, and you're not about to make it, most likely. Like, let's just be real, because you're just doing business incorrectly. So you got to have your stuff on all these different places. It's the most beneficial to have it that way. Now, in terms of like Instagram specifically versus the website, what you're talking about is absolutely on point. Instagram, yeah, you can sell through it, and there's a number of things that are absolutely positive and powerful that it can do in terms of advertising and all that stuff. But the reality is that it's better served as a marketing tool to acquire and gain access to communities that are already on there, and have it be targeted and have it be a niche audience, and then having them go straight to your website to make an informed decision. The reason why that matters is because on Instagram, you're not going to be able to empower loyalty through your newsletter. You're not going to be able to empower certain other elements of your brand experience that are ultimately going to encourage loyalty or build brand for you. It's going to build brand for Instagram the whole time along the way if it's only on Instagram. And so ultimately, you want to control that experience and brand it out. So it's just better to get everybody to search online through Google and YouTube and come across you and your website. And then if they are on Instagram and they discover you, then it should be a funnel that takes them straight to something they can buy, straight to something that they can learn about, straight to something that interests them, that it, excites or empowers or inspires, or maybe they're emotionally tied to it. And then again, it takes it to your website.
And your website should be clean. It should look professional. It should work as a
black and white. Black and white, fine.
Yeah,
White, black,
it can
blue,
work as an EPK as well, without being an EPK. I mean, I think even having just a one-page site to start, is somewhat. I mean, it's an investment for sure, but is a solid investment. And then as you scale a 3-page website or a 5-page website, and then like what Joey was saying, if you really want to use it at the highest level, it's every time you drop a song, you're teasing songs, all your stuff goes there first and on. But we'll continue to talk about that. Mike, I really appreciate the question and sticking around for a minute so we could get to that. That's definitely the realm of investing in websites and content is something that Joey and I know really well. But anyways, man, I appreciate everyone hanging out with us. That's probably gonna about wrap it up for us this evening. We ran a little late, but next Wednesday we'll be back 8 p.m. We did start a little bit late today, 8:30, but we'll be back 8 p.m. next Wednesday.
And 11 a.m. on Sunday sesh. I got more dabs to smoke with you guys. Now I gotta do a review of this Backpack Boys like tomorrow or the next day, and then on Sunday I'm gonna smoke the rest of it with you guys. So let's tap in.
All right.
Last two, don't forget I got that booth pack.
Jesus, he plugged it. He plugged it.
Come on, man. That's that legal California weed, that legal booth.
RMR Podcast. Appreciate you guys.
Love you guys. Peace.